Hello, Huub Savenije. We are here together at EGU 2019, and we're going to do an interview in the series of History of Hydrology interviews. And Huub Savenije is Emeritus Professor from Delft Technology University. I myself am Okke Batelaan from Flinders University, National Center for Groundwater Research and Training. And it's a great pleasure to interview Huub here. Huub is from the Netherlands, I'm myself from the Netherlands, so it's an additional honor to do that.
Yeah.
Huub, if we can go back a little bit into the history of your career, I think it would be nice to start if you could tell us a little bit more where you're coming from your youth, your background, maybe if there were strong influences from your youth that you have taken along in getting an interest in water.
Yeah, thank you very much, Okke. I appreciate this enormously. I think it's very nice to have an opportunity to talk about who I am and where I come from and what happened to me during my career. I was born in Naarden, which is in the province North Holland, not so very far from Amsterdam, but in 1952. And that doesn't mean when you're close to Amsterdam that you then go to Amsterdam. We lived in a rather small village. I am from rather common descent. My parents or my cousins or aunts were nobody went to university. I'm the first in my entire extended family that as the generation after the war got the opportunity to study. So I'm from a regular Dutch background, nothing fancy, common people.
Yeah. Okay.
And in the area where I lived, in Bussum, that was at that time, they were building the big polders in the IJssel Lake. So the big land reclamation works in the former Zuiderzee. And sometimes later when I had my little moped, I used to go there and look at all these dikes and these bridges and these impressive works, and I found that so fascinating. At that time I didn't know there was a study for that, because I went to a grammar school, in Dutch you call it gymnasium, and my focus was mostly on classical languages and modern languages, and of course we had math and physics. But I had no idea that technology was something you could study, because the people around me, they all went to study in Amsterdam, or at least most of them, and then you had to study mathematics or Dutch, which at that time was still very popular, or psychology, or remember it's then the 70s, so it was very much a period where my people said, well, it's all about it was a little bit esoteric. Yeah, people didn't like to do too many concrete things. They thought, well, we have to be more political, and technology was seen a bit as then you're a nerd, then you are not part of where things happen. But then I went to a place where they gave information about possible studies. And I thought, well, okay, let's see, physics is probably something that I'm interested in, or math, because these were my strong subjects, definitely a lot of language. And then I saw a little sign, and it said in Dutch, weg- en waterbouwkunde, which means something like road engineering, water engineering, something like that. And I said, what? Is there a university education for water engineering? That immediately drew my attention. And that's why I decided to go to Delft and in the end become a hydrologist.
Yeah, that's very nice to hear. And actually I didn't know Huub, because I'm born in Bussum.
Also?
Yes. So we're from origin
from
neighbors.
the same place.
Yes. Yeah. And so in 1971 you started then at Delft University. You already explained a little bit why it come that you started this study. And in Delft you had lectures from Adriaan Volker. Yeah. Adriaan Volker was quite famous in the Netherlands. He was a great promoter of exporting Dutch water knowledge and expertise overseas. I think it was famous. He was quoted always by saying that he traveled over an enormous number of countries in the world.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit about if Adriaan influenced your studies, or that you interacted with him, and or other experiences that you had during your studies?
Yeah, our studies in Delft were very fundamental. You know, a lot of mechanics and math and physics and a lot of fundamental knowledge, which I think is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
And then hydrology was still a relatively young field at the time. We should not forget that. And there was Adriaan Volker, who was originally, you could say, a water engineer who had worked a lot in Southeast Asia, who was French educated. He spoke fluently French and English, by the way. He had worked all over the world, and then he was lecturing about hydrology and land reclamation with all these examples from all over the world. I found that so fascinating. Yeah. He also worked a lot in the Netherlands, also in the land reclamation works of the IJssel Lake and so on. So he was really a practical engineer with a lot of experience overseas, but also always went back to the basic fundamental hydrological laws that formed the foundation of this work. Mm-hmm. And at the end of his lectures, he always had slides, projector, old-fashioned slides, and he projected, and then you saw pictures of Thailand and of Vietnam and from all over the world, and that was absolutely inspiring. I thought, yes, this is something I would like to do. Mm-hmm. Also be a person who goes all over the world, study real water, because the Netherlands being a relatively flat country, we have hardly any hills or mountains. So our hydrology is the hydrology of a rather boring, slow hydrology. Yeah. But when you go to the tropics with tropical cyclones, with rainforests, with savannas, with enormous dynamics, that is a different kind of hydrology, which I found far more fascinating.
Yeah. Okay.
But Adriaan Volker was definitely my great inspirer.
Yeah. That's very nice to hear. But then after your study, you became a math teacher.
Yes.
So not exactly directly the great dream following of going overseas.
Yeah, no, let's say something. Before becoming a math teacher, during my graduation work, I got the opportunity to go to Colombia.
Okay. Yeah.
And to do mostly field work in the Rio Magdalena with boats and doing a lot of surveys, and I really loved it. Not only the tropical climate, but also the atmosphere of people and the warmness of the people. So when I graduated, I was 100% sure that I wanted to go to South America and continue working there. But I also always had an interest in teaching. So during my graduation, I followed the courses that you require to become an official teacher. So and I also did my practical work for that. So I was qualified as a math and physics teacher. But then I wanted to go to South America. And how can you go to South America? It was the time that there was rather a lot of unemployment when I graduated in the late 70s. And it was not easy to find a job. I applied with the UN, I applied with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they just said, wait. And then I was on a long list to go to Indonesia, and nothing came of it. So I saw an advertisement in the papers for a math teacher in a gymnasium in Rotterdam, and I applied for it, and I worked there for a year, and it was great fun. I really loved it. So I was a math teacher, and then they asked me if they wanted me to stay. I said, but this is not my ambition. I don't want to be a math teacher for my entire life. Then came some lucky chance that one of the guys that I knew from Colombia came to me and said, Hubert, I'm in Africa, in Mozambique, and I need an assistant. Are you willing to come? And because I had already gone through the process, I could be almost immediately mobilized. Okay. So then I ended up in Mozambique.
Yeah.
But there I've also continued teaching mathematics.
Okay.
Also there, because there was a lot of lack of people,
Yeah.
first of all, who were educated,
Yeah.
because the Portuguese had refused to sort of educate the local people. And I did in my free time mathematics teaching.
Yeah. Was that at the university? Or?
No, it was at schools, because most of the people didn't have much more than what they would call nona classes, so the 9th class, which is a few years after primary school,
Yeah.
and that's all what they had.
Yeah.
And then we were trying to also educate the people in our own staff, because I worked for the Ministry of Water. So I gave classes to the staff and
Yeah.
to our hydrometrists that we trained,
Yeah.
and also at the technical school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the goal of the work there in Mozambique? What was the goal of what had to be done?
Well, the Portuguese had set up a rather good hydrological network. That was, of course, the result of the hydrological decade.
Mm-hmm.
All over Africa during the hydrological decade, it was mostly by UNESCO. They set up hydrometry networks.
Yeah.
And the Portuguese had set that up rather well.
Mm.
But as with everything with the colonial Portuguese at the time, it was run by Portuguese engineers, who in 1975, after the independence, mostly left the country, except for a few.
Yeah.
And that's why they wanted people from mostly Western countries, but also East European, to fill the gaps until the local staff was sufficiently qualified to do that. So I was looking after the network, I was doing hydrological studies. If there was a problem somewhere with water, they said, Hubert, can you go and look at it and see if we can solve it?
Yeah.
And this is indeed how I got to work with estuaries, because farmers take water from the estuaries as long as it is fresh.
Yeah.
But then when in the dry season the salt penetrates further, they had problems.
Yeah.
And they said, can you do something about it? And I started all my salt intrusion and tidal investigations in Mozambique.
So you were actually able to do measurements on those rivers?
Absolutely, yeah. We organized that we had equipment and that we had trained people to work with us, and we did a lot of surveys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And your wife was there, your children were born
Yes,
there?
absolutely.
Yeah.
We went together. And so my wife has always been so kind to follow me on my adventures, but she always found local jobs in her profession, so we could always work together.
Yeah.
So that was great. It's really a condition to be able to spend so much time in other countries. And our children were born there, and they were happy times.
Yeah.
Even though they were difficult times.
Yeah.
Mozambique was very poor. There was rationing of food, there was a war ongoing, so it was not easy, but it was the perfect atmosphere to make close friends, because you had to help each other.
Yes.
And I still have a lot of Mozambican friends from that time.
Yeah. And but for you, the work that you were doing, you probably did not have access to scientific literature or contact with other scientists. So how did you develop your knowledge further or expertise?
Yeah, that's a good question. You should also say these are the early days of the computers. Huh?
Yeah.
So laptops didn't exist, or desktops. Yeah. We started with a very old-fashioned HP machine, and much later we got a digital. So in our project we could buy these things, but in principle you had to do almost without computers.
Yeah.
Getting literature was also very difficult, because everything went by ordinary mail, and sometimes you could phone somebody, but that was very, very difficult. So how did you keep in touch? And I had set up some correspondence with some of my previous professors, Adriaan, Volker, one of them. So sometimes I wrote him a letter, I have this problem, and can you advise me? But then it took 2 weeks before you got a reply, and often you had already worked it out meanwhile. Yeah. So you went back to the basics, the basic physics, the basic equations that you derived from fundamentals, and you tried to solve it. Yeah. And this was, I think, for me, the most important period, that you are forced to observe. You see things that you maybe don't fully understand, and you try to explain it by your basic knowledge of the physical processes.
Yeah.
And nowadays people maybe jump too quickly to a computer model that they run to their data and see if it fits. And these models are so complex that you often even don't know what the model exactly does. But at that time you were forced to really look at the primary processes.
Yeah. So you have to really, from the data, and understand what the processes are. And Google didn't exist and couldn't give you an answer.
No, indeed.
Yeah. So you stayed there till 1985, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then you left, that was with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Yeah, until then with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I got a job with Euroconsult. Euroconsult is now a company of Mott MacDonald's, but that was the international consultancy firm of the larger Dutch group Arcadis nowadays. And we worked all over the world in water, irrigation, drainage, land and water development. And I was a hydrologist of that company, and they sent me all over the world to places where they did studies, where I then did the hydrological studies. So I came in many, many different places. And I learned to apply my knowledge very quickly. So you had short time, short deadlines, observe, collect data, and make a recommendation. And that is something quite interesting as a school to learn to do that. But I found it scientifically often too shallow. I wanted to dig deeper. And there was no opportunity for that. And that was maybe after 6 years of traveling over the world. It's also not so good for your family. You don't see half of the year I was away, so my wife had to look after the kids herself with a job, and so it was not so easy. So and I also always had the ambition to become a teacher again. And to work out the theories that I had developed in Mozambique and which I could test in different parts of the world during my consultancy time. And I thought, I want to do a PhD on these subjects and then maybe become an academic. But it was rather late in my career because that was in 1990. So then I was 40. No. I have to calculate quickly. I was 38, I think.
38, yes. No, still. But that was done at your 38. You started an academic career, basically. You did not have a PhD yet. You started at IHE in Delft. But it went very fast then, because I believe in 1992 you finished already your PhD, 2 years after you started. And in 1990...
And in part-time.
Because you had to...
I had to set up a course in water resources management and do my education part. And then in 1995 you were appointed already professor at IHE. And 4 years later... professor at Delft Technical University. So indeed, although very late in the career, 38 you started, you made, as we would say, a flying start. Is there something special from this period that you can recall? Must have been very busy period also, trying to become an academic, finishing a PhD, starting as a professor. So there's also an advantage of starting late, because in fact I already knew what my PhD was going to be about. It was going to be about this salinity intrusion in the estuaries and the tides, and over the years I had developed this theory. I had even published some 3 papers in Journal of Hydrology during my consultancy time. So I had already quite a lot of material, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. So, what I had never done before, and this is something that I wouldn't recommend now, I had not studied the literature at all. So I had developed almost everything from my lecture notes and basic textbook stuff. So I was not aware what was happening in the rest of the world. And during, of course, the first year of my PhD, I collected as much as I could the literature, which at that time were photocopies. Eh? Yeah. So let's be clear again, it's not like now you do some easy literature search. You go to the library, find a paper, you look at the reference in the paper, you dig further, and this was how it went. And you talk with people who say you should read this or that. So I did a lot of literature study, but I could also test and apply my theory that I already had and develop it further during these 2 years. And that then culminated in a PhD thesis, which was the basis later for my book on estuaries. And so it went rather quick. But at the same time, indeed, as you said, I had to develop the field of water resources management, because in '92 there was the Rio de Janeiro conference, and together with Frank Rijsselman, I was the author of a background document on water for the Rio de Janeiro conference. And we developed the first theory on integrated water resource management. And I then made the course on the basis of that philosophy. And it was the first in the world that actually did that. That was also a beautiful thing to do. And then the IHE asked me to become a professor of water resources management. Not of hydrology, but of water resources. Yes.
I realized that. And then another story, I think, from the beginning years that you were at IHE is that you had a special activity, apparently, in which you were involved, which was the training and guidance of the, at that time, Dutch Crown Prince, currently
the Prince of Orange.
The Prince of Orange at that time. Now he's king of the Netherlands, in becoming a promoter of water management. He took on a kind of a job to be a water promoter of water management. So how did that happen?
Well, from what I heard before that is that he was looking for a professional job. He was, of course, the Crown Prince, but he didn't just want to be somebody who cuts ribbons. He wanted to do something useful for society, and he was searching for it. And from what I've been told, he discussed this with his father, and his father said, "Look, in Africa and in the rest of the world, water is the main thing. You should take water as your profession." And they liked it, but his brother who later deceased, studied in Delft aerospace technology. He always called it my smart brother. And he said, "Well, if you should then study water, you should study water management." Okay, let's do that. The word water management was not very well known at the time. And then he said that on television in an interview. And I happened to be with a close friend of mine somewhere in a hotel far off, where we were writing the policy document for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on water. And we had just finished it. And we were sitting, we switched on the television, and then we saw the Crown Prince saying, I choose water management. And then my friend from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, "Yes, this is great. We're going to get our Crown Prince to promote this for the Dutch government that he was working for." And so it happened. And at some stage, his private secretary visited the IHE, and I was a vice rector of the institute then. So the rector and I spoke with him, and then we talked about water and our course in water resource management. And then soon after that, they asked me if I couldn't tailor a personal program for him to train him in all the intricacies of water management. And indeed, I did that for a year, and I traveled with him to different places in the world and introduced him to the Global Water Partnership and WaterNet in Southern Africa. And later he became, for the UN, I only did that for a year, he became the figurehead for water supply and sanitation.
But he was very successful in that, I think, in that period. He helped putting water on the map.
Absolutely,
absolutely.
Very important.
So then in 1999, you made a switch from IHE to Delft, although you stayed, I think, also part-time at IHE. So what made you do the switch to the chair of hydrology that was hydrology in Delft.
Yeah, well, the course in water resources management went very well. It ran by itself, and I was no longer inspired much by the innovations in water resource management. I had the idea that after the theory on integrated water resource management, it was more or less done. And I still had this love for hydrology. Mm-hmm. So when the professor of hydrology he invited me at some stage to come and teach more about the surface runoff part of hydrology, because he himself, Kees van der Akker, he dealt with groundwater mostly. Yeah. So he said, can you not come and deal with the rivers and the catchments, hydrology at the TU part-time? And I said yes, because that had always been my love, in fact. Yeah. So I started part-time there in 98. And then when he retired in around 83 or 84, there was a public call for the hydrology chair. I applied, and I got it. And from that moment on, I was full-time hydrology again.
Yeah, right. And so in 1999, I think you started. So that's 20 years that you have been full professor in Delft at the university. And you have been incredibly active during those 20 years in publishing, guidance of students, but also very much in international engagement, in hydrological organizations, in editing. You basically started with HES in the open access and created it. What are highlights for you from those 20 years? What are your biggest achievements for Delft?
Yeah, okay. Now there are of course, let's say, scientific achievements, and there are more achievements in let's say in serving the hydrological community. I think the highlight, well, maybe I should say that in 2004, just after I became a full-time professor, I went on a sabbatical of half a year, and I took that time to write a book on salinity and tides in alluvial estuaries, which I think is my professional highlight. And at that time, I also spent a lot of time. I was half a year in the University of Western Australia with Batelaan. Yeah. And from that moment onwards, my publications just went booming. Also because working with Siva and people like him, some of them are my great professional friends, has been extremely inspiring in shaping your ideas. But it also showed me that having these international contacts with EGS at the time, I was president of hydrology section of EGS, later of IHS, and also later of the AGU, that being active in these organizations is not just a service to the community, it also serves yourself without that objective in mind. But you come in touch with a lot of people, you become inspired by what they do, and that shapes your scientific thinking a lot. Yeah. And it's very hard to pinpoint where your best ideas came from. They came from the cloud of people that you interact with. And I'm a great believer in sharing ideas and not keeping things to yourself. Yeah. When you're all by yourself, okay, you can be smart in your little corner, but you can never be as smart as when you interact with others. So that is for me also a great highlight, being part of this international community. Yeah. And another highlight is that during my time at IHE, I got the opportunity to help set up what we call WaterNet in Southern Africa, which is something similar to a network of universities and the EGU, because every year there is a great symposium of all water people from the different partners in WaterNet, and it's a very stimulating. It's of course not as big as EGU, but it is definitely as stimulating as our meetings on water. And that network is fully operational, run by local scientists. And this is one of the most fruitful things in the international community that I've been able to contribute to. Yeah.
and within the university you trained 35 students? Probably?
35 PhD students.
PhD
Master students is of course a multiple of it.
Yeah.
But it's 35 PhD students. And they are all over the world because roughly I think half of them come from the developing world or internationally. Mm-hmm. So my PhD students are almost everywhere.
Yeah.
And this is also very nice because I consider my PhD students as my professional children, right? Yeah. And so you feel close to them. When you work closely with each other for 4 years, it is a strong tie. Yeah. And some of them now have become professors and also have PhD students, so I have already professional grandchildren. Yeah. Which is very great.
Yes. No, that is indeed very special always. Yeah. So a lot of teaching and research you have done, but you also always kept this link with the measurements very strongly. Yeah. Is there for you, and that's special in your career, that you started late and did probably lots of measurements before you became an academic, is there a general lesson that you can draw, a value that you see in doing measurements as an academic? What would you tell to the current or future generations with regards to measurements, now that we have all the computers and modeling and sensing opportunities?
Yeah. Well, field observations are not only important just to test your theories, they are inspiring. Mm-hmm. Because when you are in the field and you see the water flow and you're actually there, that's where you start thinking about how does this really work. Mm-hmm. It is very, very inspiring. Mm-hmm. And then when you work out your observations and you try to plot them and you test theories, then you always find these outliers. Mm-hmm. And of course you can take a rubber eraser and take the outliers away, but that's the most stupid thing to do because the outliers are the interesting things. Yes. In the outliers, your theory is apparently not able to explain what you observe, and that's where the innovations are. So doing observations, if you want to further the theory, you can't do it by sitting behind your computer and digging a bit deeper than other people have already done before you. You have to move on different pathways. And that's when you have to do observations. I've always said that you have to walk on untrodden path, mm-hmm. and not just continue on a well-trodden path where most people are, mm-hmm. but then that you will stand out with something new, the chance is extremely small. You may get a lot of citations, but you're not going to find a lot of new things. But if you go into a poorly trodden or untrodden path, you have to do your own observations and you can develop your own theories. Yeah. And they're not always leading to, there's sometimes a dead-end path. Yeah. And then you have to go back and find another one. Yeah. But this is the way how you find new things.
Yeah. So you are a highly cited hydrologist, which really shows your scientific impact, and that has been really recognized by different organizations. Your own university has said that you awarded you the Best Lecturer of the Year award for a number of times, I believe, but you also received several international awards. The Henry Darcy Medal of the EGU, of course, AGU Fellow, Alexander von Humboldt Medal of the EGU, International Award of the American Geophysical Union, and then also WaterNet made you an international ambassador. And as well, you got a royal decoration. Yeah. Is there anything of all those awards that stands out for you?
Yeah, well, what you mentioned about the International Ambassador of WaterNet, which is probably not an accolade that many people know of, but that's maybe what I feel most proud of, because it is the recognition of the WaterNet network for helping to set up and make this network a success. So being an ambassador for WaterNet is something that I appreciate a lot. Yeah. But connected to that is the international award from AGU, which was also because of my work in Africa and the research and the networking in Africa. Yeah. So that's really something I'm very, very happy with. But let's say scientifically, the one that I'm most proud of is the Alexander von Humboldt medal.
Yeah.
Because that recognizes work done under tropical environments for the benefit of people in the developing world.
Yeah.
And Alexander von Humboldt is a great example to me. I mean, I think he is maybe one of the biggest, if not the biggest or most important scientists of our time, who is not much remembered. Of course, in South America, he's remembered a lot. Mm-hmm. He was a personal friend of Simon Bolivar, but also of the American president. But a lot of geographical names are named after von Humboldt, and animals. And Darwin was partly contemporary with von Humboldt, and Darwin said that he was very much inspired by von Humboldt. Darwin, of course, everybody knows, but von Humboldt is less well known, although he was a great scientist. And the book by Andrea Wolf,
very nice book,
is amazing. The Discovery of Nature. I can recommend that to anybody. Von Humboldt is a great scientist, and he connected all the different disciplines, among which hydrology. That was amazing what he did.
And Alexander von Humboldt is probably a good person to, somebody who worked very interdisciplinary, and I believe that is also something that you feel that is very, very strongly needed.
Exactly. And comparing different parts of the world, what we now call comparative hydrology, he did that. He, for instance, at that time, that was revolutionary. He said, if you go up a mountain, it's the same as going from the tropics to the northern hemisphere. And so a trajectory in height is similar to a trajectory in space. At that time, that was revolutionary.
So, I have read before and heard before, and it's also obvious in this interview as well, that you're very passionate. Do you know from where that comes?
I don't know. This is just the way I am. I am an emotional person, and when I am fascinated by something, or if I'm convinced about something, then I can talk about it in a very, very dynamic or passionate way. But it's just, I think, the way I am. I find it very, very hard to sit back at a low voice and then speak something in a distant way about a subject that is close to my heart.
And so, besides all your successes, you must have had some disappointments or failures. Can you share also some of those?
Well, of all the discoveries you make at least 10 or 20 wrong assumptions. So what I said about the untrodden path, many of the untrodden paths are dead-end paths. They don't lead to anywhere. But then you go back and you learn from these mistakes. Or let's say that you had an idea and you thought, let's try this, and then it doesn't work out, it doesn't work. So, of course, we don't publish all these things because they are part of a discovery process. But it would be good if you have invented something new, that you also mention what you tried before and what failed. Because there is a lot. But disappointments, yes, of course. My wife always said that, and I sit behind my desk and say, I now found something really new. And then she says, you say that all the time. and it most probably is going to amount to nothing again. Which is indeed true, because mostly it doesn't work out. It's again a wrong assumption.
Do you feel that you got recognition from the colleagues, and did you have problems with your publications?
Well, that isn't. Yes and no. When I started, almost all my papers were single author publications, and at the time when I wrote them, I thought they would have a big impact, but they were not cited at all. So it's single author. When you work alone, you're not cited because very few people just read a paper because it's there. Mostly it's because people it's pointed out by somebody else. So you really, really need to work in groups and develop your own school. And in general, in the beginning I was really not cited much. When you do work that goes against the flow, you're not cited generally. You are cited within communities that all do the same thing. Mm-hmm. So it changed when I started to have my own students, because the students and the offspring of the students, it's sort of making a school. Mm-hmm. They started to cite it, and then it also went outside the group. So now I would say you reach a certain critical level, mm-hmm. and then people start to read your work and refer to it more. But that was in the beginning sometimes disappointing, yes. Yeah. But it never changed my working attitude. Mm-hmm. I always wanted to do something new. Yeah. And in very different fields, like we talked about, of course, the estuaries. But I worked also a lot on catchment hydrology, on climatic circulation, on groundwater as well, on hydraulics. Mm-hmm. So, and I think it is good that you study in many different fields because you start to see connections.
Yeah, that's this interdisciplinary which you clearly like and promote. And you have just said before that once you start to publish more with other people and with students, that it went off in terms of your citations. Have you, in that process of working with other people, made friends and with all those researchers, or bonded strongly with others?
Yeah.
Have they influenced you?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I've made many what I call professional friends, and these professional friends also become real friends. Mm-hmm. My colleague at the TU, Nick van der Giezen, is a very close friend. We hardly published together, but we talked a lot together, inspired each other a lot. Batelaan is a close friend that I worked a lot with, not published much with him, but we worked a lot and shared ideas, and the same is with Günther Blöschel. Yeah. So these are the three people, and Alberto Montanari as well. These are the three, and Dimitris Koutsianis. I can mention many more, and there are many more. Siva was maybe the biggest inspirer, and this is also what in the international community he does. Yeah.
Okay, that's very nice. That's an important part of science that grows via friendships and via inspiration from others.
And maybe what I forgot, I also worked a lot in the water resource management, and there I worked closely with Peter van der Zaak and so many other people, and economists also, and that all helps. That all changes your perspectives, also on optimality. Economists think about optimality in a completely different way as hydrologists, and you can learn a lot from each other.
Yeah, no, that's very good. So we slowly come to the end, but before we finish, you retired last year. Do you still have plans? Scientific or not scientific?
I have plans, but procrastination is one of my new hobbies. Okay. So delaying. I still have a couple of students that I help supervise, but there are people who closely supervise them, people from my staff in the TU Delft. So I sit a little bit more on the backbench there. I still have a couple of international functions, which I will nicely complete, and I'm still sometimes invited for a talk, but at some stage you have to stop that. As soon as you are no longer an active scientist, you should also stop giving scientific talks. But I still want to give a third version of my book, Salinity in Tides and Alluvial Estuaries. This is still on my to-do list, but there is no rush. And for the rest, I dedicate a lot of time to my family and my hobbies.
Okay.
And
they probably deserve that after so many travels and being away from home often. So maybe in summary, because you just said before also you did not only work on estuaries, but a lot more, catchment hydrology, groundwater, water management. In all of that, what do you see the greatest legacy for hydrology or water that you have contributed to?
Yeah, sometimes all the ideas that you had in the beginning, that relatively simple models can do the job. Yeah. And which goes completely against all these complex models that we are setting up. Simple models can do the job. Yeah. We often don't know why. And in that respect, I think I have more recently made a couple of discoveries that you can show why a simple linear reservoir works, why a bucket model works.
Yeah.
And the paper that I wrote with Marcus Rachowitz on modeling catchments as if they are living organisms is, I think, my biggest contribution to this, because you have to realize that a catchment is not a dead thing like a model. A model is in principle a mechanistic dead thing. A catchment is alive. There is an ecosystem there that continuously adjusts itself to atmospheric drivers. They modify not only the single species, but the composition of species is modifying. The ecosystem develops, it changes in response to change in the drivers. And the ecosystem manages the water. It's not people, although you could also say that people are part of the ecosystem. It's not that people manage the water, it's the ecosystem. The ecosystem intercepts the water, facilitates the infiltration, stores it in the root zone, makes sure there is drainage when there is too much, prevents surface runoff. And so it partitions, the ecosystem partitions the water. It's doing that, but there are laws behind it. Why does it do it? Most probably to warrant its survival, or to optimize its survival or its reproductivity or its production. But definitely, what it does is it aims at survival, because otherwise it wouldn't be there. And if you understand what drives the ecosystem, you understand the hydrology. And we have already applied this for in a number of things. We have computed the root zone storage capacity globally from climate. So if you just look at when an ecosystem evaporates more than that it receives some rainfall, it's drawing from storage. And you can, with the present remote sensing products, determine how much storage was actually used by ecosystems globally. So you can determine the root zone storage capacity that exists, which is the most important hydrological parameter that people calibrate. But you can determine it from climate. And the next thing is that it will not remain constant. When the climate changes, the ecosystem will adjust its root zone storage capacity as well. So if you have a hydrological model that you force with different climate scenarios, you are making a fundamental mistake, because you assume the model remains the same, whereas the driver is different. And that's not correct, because the ecosystem will also change. Its root zone storage capacities, it's maybe even its partitioning in transpiration. And this, I think, is the most important finding. And I hope that in the future, hydrologists will continue to understand this better, because that gives us the opportunity to see how climatic change works through in the hydrology.
And that's very much needed, that link between ecosystems and hydrology. I absolutely agree. And it fits also very well with von Humboldt. I think he could have told this story and he would have loved it.
He would probably have done it if he had been here.
So, in a final note, for you, the future of hydrology, is that in that direction that you see it as a science? Do you have maybe a final advice for the younger generation of hydrology?
Well, for the younger generation, I would say go into the field and watch. And watch closely. And we need computer models as well, because if you see that something happens in your computer model, you can go in nature and see if that is indeed taking place. We have a famous Dutch football player, Cruyff, we call him. The rest of the world calls him Cruyff or I don't know what. But Johan Cruyff, and he made very funny remarks, which are rather deep. He said something like, "You only see it when you see it, or you only see it when you understand it." And this is also true in hydrology. When you go into the field and you know what you're looking for, you see sometimes fascinating things that otherwise you overlook. So don't stop going into the field. Don't think the data are there. I just download them and apply my models. Go there and watch for yourself. That's the most important thing. And computers are good to help you, because they can help you work with all these data, but try to make it as simple as possible.
Okay, I think that's beautiful advice. And it was a great pleasure to interview you, great talking to you, very nice stories, and thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you, Okke. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thanks.